welcome back to Behind the Buzz. This is the Wild Lab series exploring the science policy interface through the lens of animal movement. And you are here at event 4, where we're covering country level applications at the science policy interface, looking at national examples of movement data tracking systems in Canada and Australia, which I'm very excited for. I'm Talia Speaker with Wild Labs at WWF, and I'm joined by my co-host Lacey Huey from the Smithsonian Movement of Life program. And as a reminder, this is part of a larger series that we're running with the support of the Moore Foundation and Smithsonian. So throughout the season, for those of you who have been coming for the past 3 episodes, we're covering a range of topics at the science policy interface, going all the way from big picture policy frameworks like the CBD and CMS in the first episode, all the way down to now looking at the national level, how these systems are actually applied. And the motivation for this series is really just understanding that navigating global policy space as a scientist or an innovator can feel overwhelming, or it can be difficult to understand how to contribute meaningfully. So our goal with this series is really to help basically filter out the noise and create spaces for dialogue, where we really encourage you to ask questions, even if they feel like silly questions. Other people are probably wondering them too if you are, so please feel free to jump into the chat and engage throughout. We're grounding the season in animal movement, as I mentioned, building on some recent work from Wild Labs and our partners. They basically just recently highlighted the significant gaps in translating conservation data, and especially animal movement data, into policy frameworks effectively. So we're looking at how we can bridge that gap and kind of build an informed community of practice along the way to do so. And Lacey, I'll hand over to you for some more context on that.
Thanks, Talia. So yeah, as Talia mentioned, this is part of a series building towards an effort to really mobilize and engage the animal movement community in support of global biodiversity conservation policy. And one specific step in that effort is to actually formalize this community in the form of a new biodiversity observation network under the umbrella of GeoBon. And this is an idea that was formed as part of a proposal put forth by Smithsonian Institution, Wild Labs, NASA Jet Propulsion Laboratory, Max Planck Institute of Animal Behavior, Senckenberg, the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences, and University of Central Florida, with funding for an upcoming workshop where we're going to really formalize these ideas and put together an application to become a new bond in just a couple of weeks. So I see many faces or names at least on here that are going to be joining us for that. And we'll be continuing this conversation on Wild Labs following the workshop. So there'll be more and more opportunities for everyone to get engaged in this. And that funding is provided by Smithsonian and NASA Jet Propulsion Lab.
Thanks, Lacey. So for today's event, we are so thrilled to be joined by 2 more incredible speakers, Jonathan Pai from OTN and Yuri Niella from the IMOS Animal Tracking Facility in Australia. Each speaker will have about 10 or 15 minutes to present, and then, as I mentioned, we'll do a brief Q&A just for that speaker. And then after both presentations, we'll open it up to kind of a more open community discussion facilitated by Lacey and myself. So John, if you're ready, we'll hand it over to you first, and Lacey will do a little introduction to you as you get your screen set up.
Yep, just need there we go. So as I do set up the screen, I realized when giving this talk this morning, I had cut it to the bone in order to meet a different time requirement. But there are 2 things you need to know that I think this room might already know, is that acoustic telemetry is the act of tagging an animal with a coded pinger tag and deploying listening stations to find that code all around the world, and that most of that technology is intercompatible. And at any given time, there are hundreds of thousands of animals running around with these little pinger tags inside of them, pinging away, trying to tell people where they are. With those 2 facts in mind, I think we can dive into what the Ocean Tracking Network is all about and where we're headed into 2025 and beyond. So first, What is our mandate? What is our mission from our funders? So we're based in Canada. We're a global infrastructure network funded by the Canadian Foundation for Innovation. So this is kind of unusual for Canada in that most of these CFI-funded programs are Canada-focused, but we were, from our inception, focused on uniting global telemetry practitioners into a network of networks. And so funded currently as a major science initiative, this means that we are an infrastructure-only program that is meant to provide scientific infrastructure to all of our research partners. We provide gear and field support, but the data part of OTN, which is my contribution, is the contribution of digital infrastructure. So this is how we've been operating since 2015, but we were inaugurated in 2008 to support a Canadian and international research program deploying this monitoring equipment in key locations around the world. And then we've been training successive academic generations of movement ecologists and biogeographers. More recently, we've increased our focus on physical, chemical oceanography and limnography with ROVs, autonomous gliders, but the goal is always to establish these partnerships across a global community of stakeholders and to help document the movement of aquatic animals in a changing ocean. So the knowledge that is collected by OTN-affiliated researchers has been useful to policymakers, industry, indigenous and coastal communities, and to the general public. Where shall I click? There we go. So the good news is we're fairly well funded. We're fairly securely funded. We were awarded full funding for a renewal application in 2023, and we will continue to operate through 2029 as a major science initiative. This will enable us to continue doing what we do, supporting a growing global network. And we're also going to specifically expand our database and our partners' databases' abilities to absorb other forms of telemetry data, including pit tagging and satellite telemetry data. With the renewal also has come a new strategic plan and a rededication to our core principles, which are track, connect, and transform. This helps us track and catalog animal movement across broader geographic spaces, a wider range of taxa, connect animal tracking practitioners to one another, and mobilize the data and the knowledge that they're producing into the spaces and formats that help guide policy, and help their work transform the way we conserve and sustain aquatic species. A newish bit of news is that we're one of the few major science initiatives up here in Canada that have been invited by our funder to change our designation to major research facility, which is a large step up in terms of funding stability. It means we no longer have to prove ourselves on short timescales to these funders. It is analogous to something like a US IUS for this specific type of data. It has some other advantages as well, but the big thing that I want you to take home is that it represents our funders' confidence in the work that we're doing and our ability to create long-term plans and lasting infrastructure to build around. It is useful, I think, to drill in a bit. The strategic plan is a bit dry. If you're into it, there was a QR code and I can share a link, but there's a couple of key points that I'd like to highlight. It's important for us through the track heading to raise the profile of tracking data generally for answering new stock management questions and operating and cataloging our progress in doing that with our status as a project of the UN Decade of Ocean Science. This group, a major success that I want to highlight is that we have an equipment loan program that is global in scope. You can call us from any part of the world and apply into the equipment loan program. It is a direct example of how we activate our partners and empower them to add new monitoring capacity to the world. We have many more listening stations here at home in Halifax than we could possibly service ourselves. And this pool of receivers is set up to support partners in their own research activities. So there's a short application form on the OTN website. That QR code will take you there. Researchers can submit a science plan and we will distribute equipment to the successful applicants. Even if you're not studying animals directly, we will partner with platforms of opportunity who are servicing buoys and moorings for other reasons. We'll add acoustic telemetry detection capability to those moorings. This is not a unique thing. I think you'll probably hear similar stories from my partner here, but this helps us keep as many of these pieces of equipment as possible in the water, helps us see more animals in more places. So if you'd like to learn more, please do follow the QR code. Connect, the second pillar, is where I become important. Data mobilization becomes important. So making sure we can stay connected with our partner networks and understand the data needs of this global community on an ongoing basis, helping to steward the data standards that enable us to collaborate. Connect is also about training the next generation of telemetry practitioners by administering workshops, creating learning opportunities, and expanding the capability of our partner networks to ingest and publish data that's collected by new technologies that are coming down the pipeline. Notably, we're going to be building this satellite data processing capability, mobilizing animal-borne oceanographic instrument data into forecasting models as part of the IMOS program, We are following in the footsteps of the other speaker here today and his network, who are pioneers in this. So hopefully we'll see more of that. But another thing that I want to highlight is we want to ensure our stewardship is productive, inclusive, and collaborative. So we align with the FAIR principles, but also the CARE and OCAP principles that are recommended by UNESCO, and ensure that the knowledge that we collect is co-produced in ways that empower the local and indigenous knowledge holders to retain ownership and stewardship over their data. The pipelines we build will respect the network data policy and also aim to do the most good with the data that's being mobilized. A specific example for Connect, how we meet the training and the outreach goal, is OTN Study Hall. The way Study Hall works, every week, myself and some other members of the OTN host a freewheeling open forum virtual gathering. We aim to build a place where students and early career researchers can meet and get support from one another, and where OTNers could just connect with these people from around the globe to discuss problems with data analysis, share tools and methods, and explore solutions to common problems and errors that people get. It's very informal. There's no judgment. It's just people that gather to problem solve. We've hosted these for several years now, and they've proven to be instrumental in connecting hundreds of researchers from labs in all parts of the world. From Svalbard to New Zealand, I think, is now the current geographic scope of those. The final pillar is transform, and it's about bringing our hard-earned data to bear on policy. So in a targeted way, ensuring they're aligned with national and global conservation initiatives and measures, and by ensuring that open data is available and understandable to the public. It's also about ensuring that those new and novel data collection methods get integrated into this big shared system so that we can all benefit. So a lot of OTN's strategic plan goals are about new capacity, physical infrastructure a lot of time, but also digital infrastructure. The way that we fit in as a data center, the way that we help fulfill that infrastructure mission is by being this reliable, reproducible example of digital infrastructure. There are a couple of needs and concerns that researchers have that us data managers are very well positioned to satisfy. So when researchers are sharing data amongst themselves, combining their data holdings into one larger data set, the key is making sure everyone is recording their metadata and data and quality controlling it to a uniform standard. So we maintain and extend a standard at OTN that meets as many of the needs of our partners and affiliate data networks as possible, while still being manageable for conducting field work. At OTN, we also support, co-implement, and share common telemetry data analysis workflows. We partner with people who are authoring the analysis packages and help backstop these institutional or volunteer efforts where they're serving a large community, where they're filling in an important part of the data pipeline. We make sure our data is fit for their purposes, so you can use their tools against our data, and we ensure that their software can act on any of the data sets that our partners are collecting. Geographically, what does this look like? There was a paper by Chuck Bangley, came out in 2020, celebrating the intercompatibility of data across the ACT network, which is in green, the FACT network in red and purple, and OTN up on the North Atlantic coast. So if you squint, you can see me just where the blue is at its thickest. So since that paper's been published, there are new networks. Miramar has extended the reach of this system southward through the Mexican Gulf Coast and Southern Caribbean, as well as the Central Pacific. New compatibility with networks like ITAG and RAFT will extend this coverage further through the Gulf of Mexico and into the freshwater systems of the interior USA. The strong collaborative spirit of these independent networks are bolstered by this intercompatible infrastructure, and has helped researchers capture and catalog movements across the entire Northwest Atlantic from the Arctic through the Caribbean. These success stories, in turn, I go back to my funders with these, and they continue to make the case for OTN to our funders. To talk about Canada a little more, OTN does support and connect independent networks where we can. We build out a connectivity through our loaner program that I mentioned earlier, but we also support the research community in Canada through backbone listening lines that we maintain ourselves across Canada's oceans. So these are a few key lines positioned across the Scotian Shelf and the Grand Banks. They are co-designed and maintained through partnerships with DFO, which is our equivalent to NOAA. To serve all these stations economically, we can deploy wave gliders with modems that communicate with underwater stations and let us gather data on an annual basis, despite these undersea moorings staying in the water for 7 years at a time. This becomes important when you're servicing lines that have over 250 stations, as is the case with the Halifax line, which is this inset here. A few months at sea for a wave glider, and then a team of pilots on shore who are steering her can recover data from hundreds of listening stations and refresh the knowledge of how animals are using the Northwest Atlantic, all while collecting oceanographic and meteorological data at the same time. Also, nobody gets seasick. While the west coast of North America is not yet as well covered as the Atlantic coast, OTN also maintains key lines in Canada's Pacific, looking to build backbone capacity and generate the same broad-scale collaboration across Canada's west coast. So recently, we've seen great strides toward pan-Pacific coverage between our partner networks, PIRAT in the Pacific Islands, PATH in the California Valley watershed, and OTN's Northeast Pacific node, which covers Western Canada and the Northwestern US. But recently, the addition of a new partner in the region that seeks to unite American researchers across Alaska through the US Pacific means that we might be well on our way to a continent-scale partnership that operates in the same way that we've been doing in the Atlantic and Eastern Arctic. So if I could switch from the geography to the hexagons for a moment, this is the game at a very high level. We share a common set of data pipelines and processes. These networks can reliably quality control, cross-reference, and share the incoming data. We have the exact same format and process on the input and the output phases, and thereby we achieve intercompatibility. This also helps us share our analysis tools. So now researchers in Norway can develop a tool that was first built in the Great Lakes to help understand migrations up and down river for migratory populations that have nothing to do with each other except the fact that they're both somewhat anadromous. So as a link in the chain between the researchers connecting these animal presence and movement data and the global understanding of marine biodiversity, OTN and our partner networks have this ability now to work together across regions and disciplines to securely and accurately move information towards the decision makers and help our researchers create change from local to global scales. We can create context and express the power of electronically tagged animal movement data to the Ocean Biodiversity Information System. We can provide environmental data that we collect incidentally to the appropriate oceanographic data pipelines, and we can represent Canada as a strong international leader of handling this data in which we specialize. So a little bit of a historic snapshot, a little family picture that includes Yuri's very intrepid gang down in Australia. Something that you might know about me is that I'm a computer scientist by trade. I'm not a very good biologist at all. I'm more of a data person and a people person than a fish person. So my own role is through building and expanding not just these data pipelines, but also these partnerships. But to ensure that we're doing things the right way, the OTN data team and I, led by our International Data Management Committee, we're responsible for understanding the evolving global standards and the quality control frameworks that are helping build trust in these collective data systems. So happy to say that recently our data center, the database, the data processing pipelines, and the procedures that we follow were certified by Core Trust Seal. And then late in 2024, we were also accredited as an associated data unit of the International Oceanographic Data Exchange. And with both of these certifications in hand, we were welcomed as a member of the World Data System. We secure these certifications for the shared global system to help people who are looking for data they can rely on see us as a valuable resource in the observation network that we're all part of. I'm not going to talk about specific data pipelines. You can come talk to me later about this. It is part of my job. But I will mention that the first well-established pipeline that OTN has designed for publishing telemetry data to OBIS is found here. We wear another hat. We are the thematic OBIS node for electronically tagged animal movement data. So we're responsible for publishing this data into OBIS, and we participate fully and eagerly in the OBIS community. Part of our role as a thematic node is to design the data publication standard that fits OBIS's format and properly represents our stripe of data within their broader system. So it's not necessarily that I have to publish all of the tracking data that happens, but I help build and inform the standard, and then the national or regional other nodes can publish it to that standard, and then everybody gets along. Thanks to the common format and intercompatibility of the node network, we can create a standardized public archive for any project across any of the regions that wish to publish their data into OBIS or GBIF. So here in Canada, there are set data sets like DFO programs, Passamaquoddy Regional Pelagics, or consultant-led projects like Robichaux Sturgeon, but we publish a lot of freshwater animal movement data as well as marine, and there's a little bit of a heat map here on the OBIS portal. These are the currently published data points for the Atlantic region. A key consideration when this kind of data shows up in an OBIS or a GBIF user's general searches or species records, we're putting these presence records in their proper context. It's a set of very well-tracked individuals. So if I have 50,000 detections of one salmon, we're informing OBIS properly, like, hey, we're following the journey of a single animal through time and space. We're not observing 50,000 salmon. So the last thing I'll say, OTN is an eager participant in the emerging goose network called IMOS for animal-borne ocean sensors. As a national data assembly center for this network, we intend to serve Canadian researchers who are instrumenting animals with oceanographic sensors and helping them connect the real-time data they provide to the global telecommunications system. These animals, like an ocean glider that you don't know how to steer, they're very capable of staying at sea for long periods of time and inhabiting very hard to sample regions of the global ocean. The pioneers for this work are at Australia's Integrated Marine Observing System. They have informed a vision of global community of researchers that are sharing this important data on timescales that allow it to be optimally useful. OTN's intention as part of our strategic plan for the coming 5 years is to support Canada's contribution to that noble goal. So I think that's a good enough amount for me to sort of start us off with. And if there are questions, I'm happy to take them. And I'm really glad for you guys inviting me and hopefully get collaborations going with OTN.
Amazing. Thank you so much, John. That was a great presentation and so helpful. There are so many graphics in there. Lacey and I are already like, oh my gosh, we have to steal this. We have to ask John for this. So super helpful just to see how these pieces work together in the context of OTN.
You're
Lacey,
welcome to any of them. Yeah.
cool. Thank you. Lacey, did you want to jump in with the first question for John?
Yeah, again, John, thank you. You had so many points that we have been thinking about, and so it's sparking already a lot of great thoughts about, especially for the cross-taxa collaboration part of the MOVE-ON effort. So, but I'd say one practical first question I had was whether OTN is engaging with freshwater bond or aware of freshwater bond.
We don't have direct connections to any bonds as far as I'm aware, but what we do is find folks that are doing acoustic telemetry in freshwater systems. So the systems you didn't see today are GLaToS in the Great Lakes. Raft we sort of alluded to, but they're handling the major US rivers. In Canada, the freshwater stuff just goes into the correct regional network for it. But yes, there's a lot of freshwater practitioners in the data systems that I was showing you, and there's a couple other data systems specific to freshwater, but their connectivity to a freshwater bond is a mystery to me, although
Yeah,
it's theirs to chase.
it seems okay. Yeah, I'm just starting to pull these pieces together, and it seems like some kind of low-hanging fruit conversations that could happen there. So, okay, and then, or Talia, do you want to ask the next one, or?
Yeah, I
Kinda
guess
go on
that's
with
this one that we might come back to in the open conversation too, because I think I'd be interested to hear what you both think. But given that you and Yuri have also interacted and that nice visualization you shared with all the different data sets and where they cover, I guess one of the things we were hoping to hear about is like, what are the biggest opportunities for improving collaboration between these different national systems? So whether that's like partnerships, data integration, technological advancements, like what are the barriers and opportunities you see there?
Opportunities, intercompatibility. There's been one dominant practitioner of the hardware for so long that there's an accidental intercompatibility. There's a new initiative called Open Protocol where a group of manufacturers are agreeing to intentionally make intercompatible gear. And so the ability to extend your observing capacity to all of your neighbors and then to the global community is important. But the threat, Tobler's law of geography says people care most about things that are closest, and that's true here too. So the power of having regions and nations sort of set the tone on data sharing within the network, data sharing to the public is very important. And it's something that we enshrine in this network of networks approach. So as long as we agree we can play with one another, everybody gets to have a strong identity for themselves and set the tone for their own collaborations within the regions. So that has been a very important feature of what we've done so far.
Wonderful. Thank you. John, since we have a little more time, also if others have questions for John, please drop them in the chat too. But your comment just before the event started about like basically the marine community advancing in part due to like high costs of technology. I'm really interested in that. Could you speak a little bit more to like, it seems like we have a lot to learn in the MOVE-ON space, trying to bridge these different silos, whether they're taxonomic or geographic. And it seems like we have a lot to learn from the marine community in terms of like figuring out this coordination component. So yeah, why do you think that the marine community has done well, and what are some lessons learned there?
Yeah, so the focus that we've had on building sort of a backbone of infrastructure does not come cheaply. The reason that we originally started with annual moorings, so imagine having to go out every year and lift up 250 anchored moorings and change them over, re-battery them and put them back down. So now you're looking at millions of dollars in ship time and hardware and person time, and some poor soul is at sea for 4 weeks doing all that. That is the kind of thing that is very difficult to scale. So when each person can take on a little bit and then add their part to the whole, we get the kind of connectivity, the kind of coverage that is the envy of the world without having any one person spend tens of millions of dollars on anchors and moorings and ship time. So finding solutions to reduce costs but still gain the ability to monitor large swaths of the ocean. Collaboration is the big one. That's also why we got into ocean robotics here at OTM, because that's another big way that we can knock costs down.
Makes sense. Thank you. One other area that came through really strongly in the registration questions was how you think about like linking to global policy frameworks from the national scale. And I'm curious how you think about that from the OTN perspective. Are you more focused on like, clearly there's coordination on the global level, but do you just trust like the national goals and targets and frameworks to align and feed in, or are you actively also thinking about how these directly contribute to global frameworks like the CBD and CMS?
Thankfully we don't have the mandate to directly think about those things. So we build partnerships with researchers and with DFO as our national oceanographic institution. Our partnerships there are meant to inform how we deploy ourselves to respond and to support those goals. So our largest partner, we are supporting tracking programs with DFO that catalog everything from white shark to salmon smolt in all 3 Canadian ocean basins and also the Great Lakes. The researchers there set the agenda, but our backbone arrays, which are periodically informed by the needs of this group, they allow us to plan to be more ambitious and build the capacity that they need beyond the federal and provincial government programs. And then once this capacity starts, academia has different questions that they might be looking to answer and they pile on. So we're never really directly deploying gear in response to a specific policy goal, but researchers are. So there are some examples to quantify undersea cables effects on snow crab migration, to evaluate potential interaction between marine life and tidal turbines, to measure on short time scales what is the success of our efforts to rehabilitate Atlantic whitefish habitat here in Nova Scotia, to track the migration of salmon across river impediments and their changing viability across the years and the decades. Those all get supported by our hardware through the loaner programs, through people relying on backbone infrastructure. Through our software, we build consortiums of people who have the same question but are differently positioned to answer it. We build them into a consortium of independent projects that share their data internally and can produce larger conclusions. So we support these efforts by our partners. We don't necessarily set those agendas ourselves.
Thank you. All right, we have a million more questions for you, but I think we might hold them until the open discussion so that Yuri can jump in too. So thank you so much, John, and we'll come back to you shortly. All right, Yuri, if you're ready, you can go ahead and get your slides up and I'll do a little introduction.
Thank you.
So Yuri Niella is a marine ecologist specializing in movement ecology and spatial data applications for conservation. As a science officer at IMOS, he supports Australia's National Telemetry Network, helping to strengthen biodiversity monitoring and conservation planning. We're looking forward to his perspective on how national scale tracking systems like IMOS can contribute to conservation impact and what lessons can be applied globally. Take it away, Yuri.
Thank you, Tali. Well, I was gonna say good morning, but it's just good morning for me, isn't it? Yeah, thanks for the first talk there, John. I could pretty much summarize my talk here, say that everything that John said at the global scale, we do that here in Australia, but at the country level scale, right, at IMOS. It's actually interesting because when IMOS was first like put together, that was actually back 2008 as well when OTN was starting. And it's funny because I was just like a young undergrad on my first year at uni, knowing nothing about life or biology at all. And it's funny to be here like part of this very big network of a lot of engaging people leading like some cutting edge technology and research. So yeah, so we are the IMOS, the Integrated Marine Observing System. Before I start, I just would like to first acknowledge the traditional custodians and elders of the land and sea on which we work, and observe and recognize their unique connection to the land and sea. We at IMOS, we pay our respects to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples past and present. Okay, so why was IMOS established? So oceans matter to Australia as a blue economy. Australia is like this country, but it's really like a continent on itself, right? For like national safety, sovereignty, and security. It's also very important for energy security, food security, biodiversity conservation. There's a lot of like coastal populations all around Australia. Australia is covered by just like two big oceans, but also like encompasses Antarctica. A lot of research done down in Antarctica as well. It's also very important in terms of climate change, variability, extremes here, especially on the east coast of Australia. We're located at this hot spot for climate change. Like the rate that the oceans are warming here on the east coast of Australia is one of the greatest in the world. And it's also very important for resource allocation. So historically, before IMOS was created, Australia's marine observing was very uncoordinated, had very poor coverage, and was very fragmented and not sustained. So the idea of IMOS is actually having this centralized entity that coordinates the observations done all around Australia. And yeah, IMOS was established back in 2006, 2007 to address all of these problems. So animal tracking is really just one of the components of IMOS. So deep water moorings, Argo floats, ocean gliders, ocean radars. And I'd like to highlight here two of the animal tracking components of IMOS. So we at the animal tracking facility, we encompass these two components. So one is the animal tagging, and that mostly relates to satellite tracking. And the other component is the acoustic telemetry component. So as John was saying, based on putting a transmitter on an animal and putting a receiver in the water and then getting the detections of the animals like that. But the main take-home message here on this slide is that IMOS is all about observing the ocean, taking measurements out of the ocean, monitoring the oceans around Australia, and then putting all of that information as open access on the Australian Ocean Data Network portal. So all of the information we're funded by the federal government, and all of this information that's generated by IMOS gets given back to the research community and to like consultancy companies, and everyone can benefit from that open access. All the data is free. That data gets published at the AODN portal. So if you guys are interested, you can just jump on that link and have a look at what it looks like. We're working at the moment at like in a new interface for the AODN portal. But that's basically what it looks like. You've got a tab there where you can select the parameter that you're interested, if that's biological, chemical, physical atmosphere, or physical water. And then you can just select the product that you're interested in. You get a little bit of metadata. How was that data collected? What's the temporal scale of that data? And then you get another tab where you can actually do a little bit of a filtering and then download that information as CSV or NetCDF format. So this is the AODN portal. This is like at the top level. So all the IMOS information gets published in the AODN portal. But talking about our animal tracking component, so the acoustic telemetry component, we have our own portal, which is available at a different link down there as well. But again, as I said, most of the information here is open access as well, because again, as funded by the federal government, we really all for open access data. But because a lot of the data included in our database actually come from the research community, when IMOS was first established back in 2006, 2006 and 7, but like the animal tracking back in 2008, actually 2013, if I'm not mistaken. People were very scared about sharing their data openly and like as open access, because as you think, I've secured this.
You may need to rejoin. All right, thanks for bearing with us, everyone. We'll just give him a second to get back in. Otherwise, it's back to you, John. Get ready to be pestered by more questions.
There have been some great questions in the chat, actually. Thank you very much, Mandy, for a really, really good complex question.
Oh, you're very welcome.
Mandy, do you want to jump in and ask that now while we get set up with Yuri again?
Oh, sure. I was actually just pivoting off of your prior question, and I just asked John, I said, pivoting off of that, which goals tend to be more pressing and therefore take priority, whether it's national or international needs? And I just asked that knowing that these can be really different and even compete with one another. And then based on what John was saying about partnerships driving priorities, I was curious in asking him if, there tends to be challenges and some bias driving priorities from like a private investment standpoint. And John, your answer was incredible. So if you want
I
to go
didn't
ahead.
realize I DM'd it. Yeah, okay, I'll say it. Thank you so much, Mandy. Thank you so much. So it's a very cool question because national needs and global needs for me, recent events notwithstanding, they were rarely at odds. So OTN's history was one of managing, the global ocean, and there wasn't a lot of fraught politics there from a Canadian standpoint. Allocating gear, we do that with a review panel of experts that come in for each loan request. So prioritization of these new partnerships, we prioritize people we haven't worked with before, regions we haven't been to before. And novel techniques that they might be using to sample things. So we are sublimating our direct national priority in the name of growing those partnerships. And the second part, there's a couple of interesting angles to take here. Our scientific director is perhaps the most negatively affected by this fact, but the OTN infrastructure is intended to be free of any direct science questions. And so we are always going to be the sum of our partners' needs. Bias will exist everywhere. So every human-driven environmental sampling effort will be biased. There's actually a great paper describing that how a biodiversity database is actually just a database of the biodiversity where humans happen to be looking. So we've seen this. The angle about private industry is something that's kind of difficult to talk about, but we have seen examples where we get private industry partners in and they don't necessarily share 100% of our values when it comes to informing the public or mobilizing the data that comes back. But we choose our partners that uphold our principles first, and that minimizes our exposure to people who have priorities that conflict with what our organization is trying to do. It still happens, but it tends to be mitigated by us looking very intentionally and describing very intentionally what's going to happen to the data. And I think if we do get Yuri back, he might also have a story to tell on this front that I think would be quite informative.
Great. There's a follow-up request from Mandy to maybe share the paper that was mentioned. Yeah.
I will try to find it.
Wonderful. All right, we're trying to get Yuri back just with vocals so he can continue his talk. We got his slides up, but it sounds like he needs to reboot his system. So we may have another minute. So if anyone has more questions for John, drop them in the chat or questions for the conversation later on. Yeah, thank you, John. You're a superstar.
Pretty fun gig. I don't know how I got it.
I loved your I'm a data person and a people person, not a fish person.
That has been possibly my advantage in all this. Yeah, I like the people that are involved.
Yeah, I think a lot of us get into conservation like thinking it's going to be about the animals and then realizing it's really the realities are about the people often. Oh, great. You found the paper.
I think so. I think this is the discussion of it. Yeah.
Fantastic.
I
All right,
can
it's
Hi, everyone.
here.
Oh,
Sorry
Yeah,
about
Yuri.
that.
Okay. Hi, Yuri. Okay,
It's
no
been
sharing
so
this
hard.
time. I will share screen. I think this is where we left off.
Yes. Yeah, so this just like a big picture here of the numbers that we are at the moment with our database. So at the moment, we've got more than 1,000 receivers in the water from a total of more than 14,000 deployments dating back to 2008. We've got a total of 178 species tracked, more than 13,000 animals, more than 172 million detections across 168 research projects. And again, more than 95% of these data is actually open access. So all people have to do is just create jump on the database, create a profile there, and then you've got the data. So this has really facilitated a lot of collaboration across our Australian community. Yeah, can we please go to the next one? Yeah, so we at IMOS ATF, we actually don't really tag we don't tag anything really. We just service the infrastructure so that people can get their pings and increase the coverage at the national scale. So similar to what John was saying about OTN, we've got this line installation. So we've got a total of 22 installations there. That we service once a year and pretty much in every single state around Australia, but the Northern Territory, and including further south in Tasmania, in Maria Island, which is like a very important region in terms of climate change. So yeah, these are all the installations that we service. And if we could just please go to the next slide, that's kind of like how the workflow of our network, how it works. So we go out in the field, we recover the receivers, and then once a year we go to each of those installations, get the data back, and then upload that to the IMOS database. And then our community, they're tagging the animals, and then they put the metadata into that web app that I showed you guys. And then when there is information from those animals coming from our receivers or from user receivers, they just get notifications that there's new data available. So everything works it talks to each other. So basically, people don't really need to further tweak the data either. So basically, when people offload the data from the receivers, they need to process that data using the manufacturer's software, and so that they could actually run their own analysis on the data. So even before they open the data itself, they just need to basically drag and drop that data into our database, and the database does all the magic of, oh, these are your animals that got detected, but also these are animals that you have no idea what they are. And because if those tags are in our database, the database does the magic and let people know, oh, look, your animal got detected in this receiver in that location. So really with acoustic telemetry, especially if you're tracking species that move a lot, like sharks, for example, most species of sharks, they travel long distances. So if you've got funding to put 10 receivers in the water, but really, you're going to only have 10 locations where your animal was moving across, right? But if you put your data into the network, that means that actually your study has 1,336 receivers, right? So your 10 plus all of the network. So anywhere around those blue points there, blue and or yellow, where your animals swim through, you're going to get the data. Okay, and all of that stuff happens automatically every time there's new data in. Again, our installations get served once a year, but maybe people offload their own receivers more often. We even recently incorporated some real-time listening stations on the coast of New South Wales, which is a bit misleading, that map, because it does almost look like there's no active IMOS deployments in New South Wales, the NSW there, but we're just under all of those yellow points. Most of those yellow points there on the coast, not the inshore ones, they're these real-time listening stations. So that's a project from the state government that they have these active listening stations to track sharks, and they warn people through a smartphone app if there is any tagged shark detected on a beach. So that data is being ingested by our database at the moment as well, even though the data is real time. So every time there is a new detection, it comes through. we offload that data once a month and feed that into our database. So people tracking other animals. So anything that's really traveling along the coast of New South Wales will get picked up by those receivers. And before they'll need to like get in touch with the project leaders from the state government and go, oh, did you guys pick up any of my animals? Now they don't need to do that anymore. So they just get the automatic email notifications once a month every time we update the database. Yes, yeah. So other than that, so when you get that email notification, that means that there's new data. You can just jump in and download from our web app. But also every 6 months we run a quality control. We just quality control our database, and that also gets published on the AODN portal. So if people are interested, really, oh, I just want to know if like movement data from this particular species, you can just jump on the AODN portal, and then you don't need to pre-process the data because there's a lot of like uncertainty in the actual data that comes out of the receivers. So there's like false detections and things like that we just get rid of all of that trash here. And this is just the quality control data set. And again, this is just on the open access data, but again, it's most of the data in our database. But there's also the possibility these days to put embargoes in the data. So if people want, they can just say, look, I want to embargo my data, which will give you a 2-year embargo time. So during those 2 years, then that's accounting from the day that you upload the data. Okay, so you've got 2 years to publish your research, and after those 2 years, the data will go open access. Okay. So just if you could just to pull a little bit of our context in the big picture in terms of Australia-wise. So we're funded by NCRIS, which is the National Research Infrastructure for Australia. That's the federal government. And basically, NCRIS, every 5 years, they define country level scale research investment priorities, right? So back in 2021, which was the last one they did, they came up with, next one, please, Talia. So they came up with a recommendation for an environment and climate step change. So basically these recommendations led to the development of a big project called Coast RI. This Coast RI project is being led by IMOS, but involves a lot of different organizations, research facilities in Australia to better understand the coastal ecosystems around Australia. And before, like IMOS was very focused on the marine environment. Now we're expanding more towards freshwater systems as well. But what that means for IMOS animal tracking facilities, that led to an expansion of our network facilities. So we got more funding to get more equipment. And similar to what John was saying, we also have loan programs. So once a year, we get applications from our Australian community of people interested in borrowing receivers from us. We have, as John said, we have way more receivers sitting in the lab than we can service, and that's really a pain to see those receivers sit in the shelf. So we really want that to be in the water, collecting more data for our community. So if you can just go to the next one, please, Talia. Yeah, this paper was published last year looking at this expansion and what that means. So for Australia, in Queensland, before the coverage of receivers was very patchy, but it's becoming really improved over the last couple of years. And what that means is that we can now cover bigger areas in different habitats. If you just go to the next one, Talia. Yeah, we got more animals detected, and we even got some broad scale movements from species that we haven't recorded before. So for example, I can't give more details, but we got a white shark that was tagged elsewhere in Australia, detected in the Great Barrier Reef after this expansion. So we're really uncovering really interesting movements of these broad, large ranging species. Yeah, so my last topic here is a little bit about engaging local communities. So at IMOS, we really try and promote, improving the participation of traditional communities in the work that we do. And one of the key things that we have been seeing is that it's really important to talk to the right people. And that by that I mean that like you got to ensure that you have the correct people in the room, either the decision makers or the knowledge holders from these communities. And it's also very important to identify the expectations of the different traditional owner groups. Sometimes in the same area, you might have multiple traditional owner groups, and the expectations might be that they just want to talk about it, or other groups would like to be involved more actively. So it's very important to actually identify these expectations. Yeah, next one, please. Yeah, and it's also very important to provide updates throughout the project, either that by newsletter or meetings, just a way to give back the knowledge that we're getting out of it and make sure that everyone's on the same page. That's very, very important. And for us, recently, as part of our expansion, we put some receivers in the furthest north point of Australia, and that's a picture of my colleagues, Jared and Sam, standing at the northernmost point of the Australian continent. And the reason why I put this photo here is because this area where we're doing work, we're only allowed to go in there if we take a group of traditional owners with us. So that was really, really interesting to have their opinion and hear from them about so one of the main species to be tracked in this area is saltwater crocodiles. And because saltwater crocodiles are a bit different from all the species that we track, they're mostly like inside of the water, right? The crocs will come out of the water as well. So it was really interesting to hear from them about their knowledge. Oh, the crocs like to go to these areas during this time of the year. So we could actually make our array and decide, okay, so let's put the receivers maybe here and there. So make our decisions based on the traditional knowledge was very important for us. We only put those receivers in the water a couple of months ago, so we don't know about the data yet, but we're really excited about this. And yeah, that'd be all. I'm sorry for the little hiccups there with the internet connection. I just moved to a new house. As you can see, the shelf is empty behind me, and still getting like the Wi-Fi sorted and things like that. But yeah, thank you very much, and thanks for the invite.
Thank you so much, Yuri. It was also really great. We need a whole nother session to just ask you guys more questions. So I'm glad this is will be one of our first points of interaction. So more to come. So I think to wrap up, we just wanted to ask both of you if there's anything specific in terms of opportunities that you see for deeper integration of movement data into global repositories like OBIS and GBIF, and how can an initiative like MoveOn work with you to advance your shared goals?
Yeah, actually, John mentioned that OTN already provides data to GBIF and OBIS, and we're at this stage now. And I would like to take the opportunity here to thank you, John, because I used some of the data that you provide these guys to come up with a template for our data as well. So we are at the stage now that I created an app to tweak our data to be ingested by these databases as well. So watch this space, and our IMOS data might be coming to GBIF and OBIS very soon as well, which is very exciting for us. And as John said, like sometimes you'll have a lot of detections from one single individual that just like hangs around the receiver. And that's very important to take, those measurements into account and inform the community. Look, that data actually comes from one individual rather than 58,000. But yeah, it's very exciting.
That's awesome.
So there is a way right now to kind of, how do you, I know we don't have time for this, how do you indicate that in OBIS? Or you're saying there is a mechanism for it now?
So okay. Yeah, I think there is a column in the data set. So they ingest data in the Darwin core format, which is very specific. So we had to there is a column there that would just say, look, this is the number, individual. I mean, there's so many columns, isn't it? Darwin core is a bit of a tricky format to work with. But basically, there is a column there that is going to tell you, look, that observation comes from this individual and how many observations were made at that point. I can't remember from top of my head, but I think the temporal resolution we do is daily, and then in each receiver and the number of detections from each animal.
The standard is hourly, but it can be daily. It's not that one's not a hard rule. But yeah, first detection per hour per location is the general way it's done. I've worked with some of the folks at CSIRO to sort of give them a little bit of guidelines. Satchit, I think, was the person I was talking to.
Yeah, yeah.
But I'm very glad to hear this, and I will answer the question in the same way by turning it back to something cool that Yuri's doing. There was a package released recently by IMOS called Remora, and what that sought to do was to streamline the researcher's ability to marry tracking data to environmental data that's being collected by the National Oceanographic Institute. Brilliantly implemented, very seamless for the end user. The ability to marry your tracks as they're moving through the system with whatever your National Oceanographic Data Center has collected for data there, and then to use those data points as inference tools to be able to try to explain the behavioral changes that you might be picking up with your animals. This thing's called Remora. I did have a link to it in the chamber, but I just switched it to send the Darwin Core thing. But this is where it lives. And we're starting to pick this up at OTN and use it as a framework for sort of adapting it to other countries that have different data collection regimes and data dissemination regimes because we like the way it's used so much. That's what we've decided to do, is just to throw our hats in the ring with Remora and build a backbone for that can be used in other parts of the world. So yeah, your team made a very cool thing, and we're over the moon about it still.
Thanks so much, John.
All of the back and forth love between these programs. So cool to see. And also the like real tools being integrated and used across them. So I know we're already a couple minutes over, so I think we're going to wrap up here. But thank you so much to our wonderful speakers, John and Yuri. This was really one of the events that Lacey and I were most excited about in this series, to just see like, how does this actually fit together at like a real applied national scale? And then how does it contribute to these global level systems too? So inspiring to see the amazing work that you're both doing. And of course, all of the people on your teams and the people who are supporting these. So yes, as Lacey said, many more conversations to come, hopefully, between all of us. For those listening or attending, we will have one more event in this series on financing implementation, because now that we have all these great ideas, we have to get funding for it. So like looking at basically mechanisms to do that and how people are approaching that part of the conversation. We're going to have that after our in-person workshop around MoveBond, so probably sometime in April, but we will post the details on the season page on WildLabs, so just keep an eye out there for more information. And with that, we'll wrap up for today. Thank you so much, everyone.